Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to another episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and welcome to another late night author interview. Now, this interview is very, very special for me. Now, if you've been with me since the beginning of my YouTube career, which was just a year ago, then you may remember this guest. He is a fellow indie author with three books already published, and by recently I mean a year ago, reviewed the first of his series, Travvelr Inceptio, which I absolutely love. As a fan of history, this is a great book. If you enjoy Timeline, well, this is the better older brother version of it, and I am not kidding. This is an incredible story, and the author has done incredible research. And to tell us more about the second book and what's been happening in his life, let's give a huge round of applause to a returning guest, my good friend, Rob Shackleford. Rob, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much, Gabe. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So for any new timers here on the channel, Rob, would you like to give the new viewers a little overview about your background as well as your trilogy?
Okay. Well, my name is Rob Shackleford, and I live in Australia. You can probably tell by the accent. I don't know. Do I have an accent? And the and we my past is in the fields of tourism, the media, and some in humanitarian aid. The inspirations to write are difficult. I had a business partner who ripped me off, and I was sitting on the beach because we lived by the beach, and I was thinking, what was this like 100 years ago? What was it like 200 years ago? Let's make it 1,000 years ago. And then the framework of the story began to take root, and ultimately, after 5 years, my first book, Travvelr Inceptio, was written. And the basic, all books have an assumption, and my assumption was, what if a person could be sent back 1,000 years in time? No more, no less, just 1,000 years. Where would you go? What would you do? And if it wasn't being kept secret, if it became a part of, due to publications in journals and that sort of thing, what if the public knew about it? Sure, there would be an effort to contain it, but what would happen? So Travvelr Inceptio talks about the accidental invention of a device called the transporter, and then the ultimate decision to send a team of specially trained researchers, in inverted commas, to Saxon England. And who would you send? Well, there's not many archaeologists who are Indiana Jones types. So you would probably, you would choose members of the special forces from the various countries who might claim some ownership to the device, and then train these guys up properly. And then what happens after? Because people don't speak Southern Californian in Saxon England. And in fact, the English that we would learn, the Saxon English we would learn, probably wouldn't cut it in Saxon England.
No.
So I try and make it as realistic as possible with that assumption.
And it shines in this book. Travvelr Inceptio was really quite the eye-opener. When I interviewed Rob a year ago, I think I had just gotten the book and I had just started reading it, or maybe I had not, and I was just so fascinated by the story, because Rob's narrative in the story and the other two books are really, really impactful, and they truly bring up a lot of interesting discussions and questions. Because if, as Rob has mentioned, if time traveling was possible and you could go back 1,000 years, what would you do? I mean, of course, the scientific community would want to study exactly what Saxon England was like, how the people spoke, what did they eat, the culture and the architecture. But it also brings in a lot of issues which are mentioned in this book. And I don't want to give too many spoilers, but there's a lot of political and scientific dilemmas that are in this book, which really raise the question of time travel. And if you exist in the past, do you fade away from your future, which was your present, or do you create your own lineage? And how does that all happen? So this book, I cannot say enough good things about Travvelr Inceptio. It was an incredible read. And reading the second book, Travvelr Probo, is the sequel and the follow-up to that. So for you, Rob, when you finished writing and publishing the first book, Inceptio, where did the idea come about to continue this story? Did you want to have like a one-off book, or because this story that you had created was so fascinating, you felt it needed to be explored more?
To be honest, I didn't have the confidence to think that I would write more than one book. I wrote this book. Originally it was called Travvelr, and then when I Googled Travvelr, my God, thousands of Travvelr books out there. So I had to change it because of the Latin that was partially spoken in the book. I decided to include the Latin term Inceptio, and hence the second book, it means probo, which is to prove. And I had a bunch of people I knew and people I didn't who said, you can't leave it there. And I went, oh, okay. Because in essence, when you think about it, if you were going to go back 1,000 years, the way we are as humans today is totally different to back then. Physically, the food we eat, the comfort in which we live. So the decision to send it to Saxon England was because you couldn't go anywhere in Polynesia because they would have eaten you. And you couldn't have gone anywhere in the Americas because they probably would have skinned you alive. And then, or Africa, they would have eaten you. And in the end, it had to be somewhere where there was the hope of being able to communicate in a way that was reasonable. And so with the end of the first book and the apparent success of the device to initiate research, with all the things that happened, which, hey, read more. The Travvelr Probo was an attempt to think, well, if that was apparently successful, where would you go? And so I chose a few locations, but ultimately the main mission was to go to Byzantine Constantinople, which is, they called themselves Romans, the remains of the Roman Empire.
Right.
They'd largely gone from Latin to Greek, and that's another area which people don't know about. Byzantium, what's that? But it was an enormous empire, and enormously troubled. So and then what would happen in world politics if there was such a device and there was only one? What kind of chess pieces would be moved to either get control or get use of this device, because the public outcry was such that they loved it. The people who were involved became heroes, and so forth. So the second book is about a number of other missions that are being planned by various countries who are trying to exert their own political influence, and at the same time, a mission to Byzantine Constantinople is planned and initiated. And then with that, I had to write a book 3, because once you start writing that, there's a third book, and that's Travvelr Manifesto. And should I tell more about that? That's a difficult one, because there's a lot more international politics, and looking at where we are today with today's political climate, I put down some interesting things there. So just be aware that there's a third book, and I kind of try and tie it all off there. I have an enormous fan in our electrician. He keeps asking me, he keeps talking to me about, well, you know, Travvelr could go this way. Are you going to write a fourth book? Oh, I don't know. You know, and he's always buying the books and giving them as gifts and all that. So the which is very nice. So I'm not sure, but I'm very happy with where the third book leaves off. And just so you know, I do have another 2 books that have been published, but they're not associated with the Travvelr universe. They're standalone books in their own right.
Nice, nice. And speaking of the Travvelr series, I'm sure you agree, Rob, that for any author, writing a book is, you know, a long and tedious journey. It's a huge passion project, and it's incredible to see, you know, the success when it's out there. And then to jump on the bandwagon and to make a sequel, which is intimidating, because for any writer or anyone trying to do a follow-up to their passion project, their baby, it's like an intimidation to, how do I follow up this story? Like, how do I make it better? Like, what do I improve upon? So for you, Rob, what was sort of the need or desire you wanted to satisfy readers in your second book, as well as the promise you wanted to make in the second book as well?
The first book deliberately left questions, and really the biggest and most daunting task, and I say this to authors who are writing out there, you'll know that sequels often end up really crappy. And so I had to make sure the sequel had to be better. I actually, well, you know, I'm quite pleased with the results. And then the third one had to be better again, you know. So how can it build on that in a natural progression? Whereas to me, it all felt like one story. It's broken up into 3 books. And while the first book left us in a certain place, and I'm grateful that people enjoy reading it, I've had a lot of very positive reviews and a lot of very positive comments. The second book does try and step outside of the comfort zone, because I was trying to keep it simple. One place, Saxon England. You know, how do these guys get trained? Then what happens to them? Right. Whereas book 2 goes the way it would happen. There'd be a lot of influence put to bear politically, and without going into that too much, it's interesting where that develops. And I really try very hard to take the James Bond approach to starting a story. For me, it's an attempt to grab attention really quickly. And the first book I've been criticized, saying, oh, you didn't really, but the second book certainly does. So it's all about learning, Gabe, isn't it? It's all about trying to develop a story without it being so cliched and rubbish. So at least I hope.
Definitely. And I can definitely say, from like rereading definitely the chapters of Probo, I mean, it really draws you in, and it really sets a tone that this is a world where time traveling is possible. You can go back 1,000 years, you can see the past, but it does raise a lot of questions. So would you ultimately say that with all of these varying themes, varying story types or tropes that are in this book and probably throughout the series, ultimately your promise is that this is going to be an enjoyable read, and it is going to make you really think about, you know, as you see, like, I mean, like time traveling or like going back in time, like really make you think, if this exists, this could, in theory, possibly happen, or something along those lines.
Yeah, and the one of the things I liked to do, and I was very fortunate to be able to travel for a little bit there, and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, she said, well, where do you need to travel for your books? And I said, well, I said, we need to go to Istanbul in Turkey. We need to go to Jerusalem, and we need to go to St. Louis in America. And she went, St. Louis. But there's the mounds of Cahokia, which is an ancient city there as well. So which kind of gives you an indication of where things get touched on later on. But so for me, it's not only the study of history from a book, but it's trying to stand under those giant walls that are still there in Istanbul and kind of imagine what it would be like to live there. And I remember I went to a university library and spent a good day there. And I was trying. The people there were so kind to help, and I was trying to find books on their own history. Once you get to a certain stage, it's amazing how little there is, and how much isn't known. And when you're writing, I had to make some intelligent decisions. So hopefully they're intelligent about going from point A to point B within this city, because they still don't know, in some cases, where these roads or parts and what was the empire like there. But there were other places that I did know, which I shamelessly sort of used the information that I was able to gather. So half the fun is the research, really, and then trying to immerse yourself. As I said to you, I went to New Zealand because my wife's a Kiwi, and which is a New Zealander, and I went to certain parts of New Zealand because there's a story in there which is relevant to that location, and it's really quite interesting, going into this one place. What's it like? What would it be like if? And that's what writing is, really. It's looking at a thread and seeing if you can build on it. And from my point of view, it's building on it from reality, from what is actually in existence. So this really could happen, and that's how I try to make it.
And it really, really shows. Like, this is like an incredible story. I actually look back at the old video that I did of Inceptio, and I was thinking, man, I remember I was really excited to like read the story. And when we first met the first time, and it was so cool learning about it. And what's funny, I read a timeline right after Inceptio just to see, and I have to say, Rob, with like the utmost authority, that your book is what timeline should be. That is my own personal opinion, but that is like 100% true, because timeline does touch on that topic of time travel and like going back, but yours really goes the extra mile. It feels organic. It feels natural. The characters feel that they exist in their world and that they're real people, and that really shows. And it kind of ties into the next question, Rob. So when you finished the draft and went through the process of editing and then publishing, what was the initial feedback like?
Well, the first book, Travvelr Inceptio, it was a lot longer. Can you believe that? And I put in a lot more about the Aboriginals and that sort of thing. And I actually took the book to an editor in England.
Oh, okay.
He did the equivalent of tearing off my arm and beating me over the head with it.
Oh no.
So after I had to dry my tears, and I went back and rewrote the whole thing and cut out a lot.
Wow.
And as you know, I mean, because of the detail that I put in, and it just, they end up 190, 1,000 words, 180,000 words. So So I actually went back and really redid it, and had to accept the fact that, well, this guy knew what he was talking about. But in some things I didn't follow. I thought, no, that story's got to stay. Accept that, remove that whole chapter, but this one's got to stay. And because in the end, an author has to stand by what they are. And
Right.
I gave it to another editor in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
and he really enjoyed it. He said, though, maybe you should target the YA audience and cut it into two. No, like leave it,
Right.
leave it. If the story's good, it's good. So and I look at that as being part of that learning curve. The being too wordy, too loquacious, too many. So that was a pretty tough one. Since then, I have relied on readers and others to tell me what they think. They get the better version or beta version, and go from there. But that was a pretty important lesson for me. Hey, when you write your first book, man, you just don't know what you're doing, really. You start off writing something that's, I think, good, but in the end, you have to accept the fact that you have to shorten things. The other thing too is I found in some parts I was describing rather than having the people tell the story.
Oh, okay.
Which again then took a sentence and turned it into 2 pages because people were having a conversation. So whatever, or the event it develops, and that's really important. So when you talk about writing a draft and then going back, I always write a draft and then leave it for a few months, do something else, maybe start something else, whatever, and then come back and go through it again. And it's shocking to see how many times I was describing rather than letting the characters tell the story. And that's important, I think, as far as character development, because then you're getting a little bit more about the person involved.
Definitely. And I know I'm still struggling with that as well. Like, I tend to describe a lot. And one of my friends who's now my editor, she said that, just let characters discuss it, like have them talk about like what's happening, so that feels more engaging. And I definitely have to agree, Rob, that you definitely see a difference from describing the scene as opposed to letting the characters talk about through the scene. And it's really, really important. And that's just a learning curve. And from that point, with the second book and the readers who have reviewed it, who have talked about it, who have shared it and posted on Instagram when it came out, did you feel that your promise with the sequel, that you were going to make it better than the first one, was validated at that point?
Yeah, I found I think it's like having kids. You lavish all the attention on the first one, and the second one tends to make their own way. So with the first book, I was, and that's only a general humorous thing, though.
Right.
The first book, yes, there was a lot more. It was read by a lot more different people, and it was given a very good review. Those who liked the first a lot tend to read the second, so I believe there's a preconceived notion that it's going to be good anyway. So I have had some very good reviews from that, and the third. So I find that some people read the whole lot, others will just read the first book and go, "Yep, I'm done." But it's about targeting a particular market. I still think there's a market there. It's a male and female market, and because the first book has romance, which was a cliche I just didn't want to do. I just didn't want to. But it started happening, and sometimes I'd be typing and things would be happening that I didn't even realize were going to happen. And
same.
And especially women readers go, oh, the romance was just fabulous, you know, and it wasn't soppy. It was just a part of what happened between two of the characters.
Right.
But it was unexpected, and so as a consequence, I believe that there are women who read the book quite avidly, as there are men, and are going on to the second and third books as well. So yes, there you go.
Nice. And that kind of leads back into I think before that, this series is, incredible. I mean, this really grabs your attention. It's a fantastic read. The characters are likable. The dialogue's funny. The dialogue is witty. And that sort of goes back to, again, you, Rob, like an author who has grown with their craft, like really finding their voice, which leads to a new question, which I want to ask you, Rob. So when you decided that you wanted to continue this story, that you wanted to continue it in the second book and the third book, what disciplined you to keep writing, like, as opposed to like motivation, like motivating you to write? Like, what have you done or did that disciplined you to continue writing? Like, I have to keep writing this story. I have to keep writing this universe that I have created because it needs to be told.
That's a good question. I think the first and foremost is that readers have said they like the book, and there's got to be more. That is my main motivation. The second, and then once, see, I don't have a timeline. You know, I don't have agents going, you've got to have another book by December. But for me, the Travvelr Probo and Travvelr Manifesto were there was enormous motivation because I just felt that people wanted it, and with that feeling that it was wanted came those thoughts. You know, when you're sitting on a sitting in the car driving, and then you have to write down some notes, or you have to check this, or you have to check that, or as an excuse to make sure the geographical sort of information is correct. Going to Istanbul, or going to Jerusalem, or St. Louis. Some of the facts then feed themselves. You get to know about the history, and the more you learn, the more you learn gives you the fuel to write more, and then put yourself into those positions at that time, and it becomes more fun, and then you see it take shape. I wrote Travvelr Probo and Travvelr Manifesto almost at the same time, and
Really,
and yeah, it was just one big regurgitation or something. I'm not sure, but the and owing to modern politics, and owing to the the way the world is, and all that, it was easy to assume that certain things could happen, and so yeah, it became fun, and that was the most enjoyable part. It was a long one, very long. Each one took about a year to write, but that's a lot better than the 5 years that the first book took, and that's largely a confidence thing, and writing is like anything. It's like swimming. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So that was the case, and thankfully I had people to rely on who were saying, you said beautiful in the same sentence 4 times, or something like that. So that sort of thing gradually improves the more you do it.
Definitely. And that kind of leads into like another discussion, as what you said just now, about like having like a group of people that really help you and like really motivate you, as well as like the fans who are really, really passionate about this story. And I've been talking with a lot of authors on this, and they brought this thing up multiple times, which I think is important to discuss, which is the sense for imposter syndrome. And everyone experiences imposter syndrome, especially authors. So for you, Rob, have you ever had moments of imposter syndrome when you were writing the first book, Inceptio? And did it ever occur when you were writing the second and third book? And how did you overcome it?
I think the first book, it was kind of this disbelief that a book was being written. And then once it was, which kind of makes the heavy editing and such not surprising, because there's always that, well, it's only me. But when the book became, when Travvelr Inceptio has a lot of very positive reviews received, for which I'm always grateful, and there's always that hope that there'll be. Wouldn't it be lovely to make some money on this? But no, not the case. But the thing is, writing the second book, it becomes largely I'm doing it again, and I hope it's good. And my wife keeps telling me that I always undersell, and I hate doing elevator speeches, and because I'm naturally not a loud look at me type person. I like doing my stuff. I like it. I love it when people enjoy it, but I don't go, well, aren't I clever? It's taken me a lot of my own work to say it's not a bad book.
Right.
One of the things that drives her crazy is I say, yeah, it's good enough. And she goes, no, it's not. And so when it comes to imposter syndrome, I look at myself as one of a lot of very good, perhaps okay, authors out there who are writing and doing a great job and getting themselves out there, writing stories. I mean, we've read those books which are rubbish, not new authors, just established in a printing, goodness, on the bookshelf, and you go, God, that's rubbish. Whereas there's others which are excellent, and they are able to be, you aspire to that sort of brilliance. Right. So the imposter syndrome, I think, is probably not a bad thing. I don't want to undersell myself too much, but I also don't want to oversell it. I look forward to the day when somebody else can say, these are damn great, we're going to sell these and make you rich. And I will go, yay. But well, you're in the same position, you know what it's like.
Yes, definitely.
And we all hope for that. We all hope for that to happen. But I don't think there's any need for me to tell everyone how great I am. I do encourage people to read the books, and I hope they like it. But just like every book, like Harry Potter, there'll be those who'd love it and there'd be those who hate it. And I accept that in life. You can't please everyone, because it'd be pretty vanilla if it was. So out there to please everyone. So imposter syndrome, I just don't like talking about myself that much. This conversation may not show that to be true, but let me tell you, I don't.
That is like probably one of the most original answers to this question. So thank you, Rob, for that. And that actually kind of leads into now a segment I like to call like the business side of being an indie author, a self-published author. So I think I may have asked you this in your first interview, Rob, so I'm going to retweak it a little bit. So with the success of the first book, and of course now the second and third, and seeing all the positive reviews, did it ever occur to you, or maybe has a fan ever said, or a reviewer said, you should send these to the printing house, or like a printing house to like have them distributed to like a wide audience? Or did you decide, I want to stay, as a self-published author because I have creative control over my story? Because I'm sure you agree, Rob, like traditionally publishing has its benefits, but to go into traditional publishing, as I've spoken with a lot of authors on this, if your book doesn't sell for that house, they'll axe you. It's a business. They will remove you. They will push you aside, and you will fall into the wasteland. Whereas for self-publishing, yes, you have more creative control, but you are in charge of everything. Finding your editor, finding a cover artist, finding an editor, and also probably the biggest thing is marketing, which is like probably the biggest thing for self-publishing an indie author. So did that ever come about when you were writing this series, Rob?
Yeah, I think what we need to do is look at, why do you write? Why does any person write? And it's like, why do you sing? Why do you dance? Why do you write poetry?
Mm-hmm.
In the end, you must do it for yourself. You must do it because there's a hunger in yourself to do it. So you write that book, you go through the difficult process to make sure that book is as good as you can do. And if that's as far as it goes, then well done you. You know, we all accept that. We accept the fact that this is as good as we get. The aspiration to become to have my writing make some income, I'd be enormously excited. I mean, you know, if HBO came up to me and said, "Look, we'll give you $5 million for rights for the first book," and I'd go, "Absolutely, but can I please, you know, be taken on as a guide at times?" But you know, we'd all love that. We'd all love to.
Right.
But today's modern, unfortunately, my experience, and yes, I probably contacted every agent in the world about 4 times. And I have certainly sent out to every publisher in the world, that not in the last 2 years, but I've sent it out, and I do know that they get inundated with all sorts of people, and they don't even answer the emails. They couldn't be bothered. It's just the way it is. And I do know that too, in publishing the the whole idea of them taking 20% and the agent taking 15%, and you get the rest, is largely gone. You know, some publishers will, you know, say, "Hey, you're lucky to get anything for the first book," or the what's even worse are the vanity publishers who will charge you $5,000, which I got sucked in. They publish your book, so I did that myself, you know, and then they did nothing, and you sort of and you're trying to communicate, and they don't want to talk to you, and they don't want to, you know, so it's obviously a con. But the taking advantage of the desperation of authors. So I don't have any answers to how do I get published by mainstream publishing. I don't, because I'm not. I think as a suggestion to every author, take it one step at a time. Be excited and delighted and absolutely proud of yourself, justifiably so, for finishing a book. Not only finishing it, but then going through the often difficult process of getting it published.
Yes.
So finding out how to do that. I've got a lady who helps me, and I just published it through KDP. I pay her to do all the formatting and all the rest, but it's so much easier than me doing it. It drives me mad. But but I still look after the cover art. I still do all that sort of thing. And to actually have your book in your hand is an amazing thing. So any author who's thinking, maybe I don't want to do this, do it, because you must. You must for yourself. The second thing that is amazing is when somebody says, "I've read your book and love it," especially if it's somebody you don't know. You know, somebody, "I loved it," and you go, "Holy," you know. So that is another thing. And an author can change the life of others. An author can influence others. An author can inspire others. So if you are an author thinking, "Shall I bother?" Do. You must, for yourself, and then for others. Then to become a bestseller, well, you know, the James Pattersons, you get somebody else to write their books for them. You know, they're a business. We can't all be there. And if you are lucky enough, fortunate enough for somebody to pick up your book, and read it and go, you know what, this is the next HBO series or the next Netflix series or a movie, you know, well, good on you. And it does happen, you know. There are Justin Biebers in the publishing world as well. But the main thing I must say is do it for yourself. Then if you get rich, good on you. Tell me how you did it.
That is probably one of the best answers I've gotten to that question. Like, thank you, Rob. That is like really, really powerful. And that kind of leads into the next question, which you probably may have already answered it, but it is, how important do you think it is for new authors to really understand their audience when it comes to their book? And I ask that because as myself, like when I write, I try to imagine, people who enjoy my book in the realms of like history, fiction, fantasy, whereas some would want to appeal to a broad audience. So in your opinion, Rob, how important is it to really understand the audience that you are writing for? Because as you said, it is important, like, write for yourself and then write for others. Like, how important is it for an author to really understand that?
Oh, that is a tough one, only because if you said to me, what's your target market, and looking at it from a marketing perspective, I would go, general, adult. I'm a bit vague on that because there have been, for example, the book's got a sword on the front, or it's actually a sakes.
Right.
It looks manly. It looks, and yet women who've picked it up have said, I don't normally read historical fiction, but this really grabbed me and I loved it, and I'm now going to read book 2. So is that a target market? I'm not a romance book, which is predictably for girls, and maybe. And there are other books which are, you've got your various genres in it. I wrote a story which, when people go, and what's your genre? I go, gentle sci-fi meets historical fiction. Like it's sort of like, what genre is Forrest Gump? Like it
Right.
becomes its own genre. And that's the difficulty when you're actually trying to promote yourself, because in promoting yourself, you have to go, and it's very, very difficult to say what your genre is, what your writing style is. My God, when people ask what my writing style is, I go, oh, give me a break. Like some people have kindly said, oh, you write similar to Michael Crichton, and I go, great, I'll grab that one. One of the greatest storytellers of the world. And yet some of his books leave me disappointed. So I Timeline, that was a good example. I read Timeline after I'd written my first book, and I was absolutely paranoid. And it's like, what's that one about the girl who goes back to Scotland?
Outlander.
Outlander. Now, Outlander came out after I'd finished my first book, and I was going, no,
really?
But they're nothing like each other. But it's still that's that author paranoia, because in order to put yourself into a market, I don't want to compare myself to the Outlander market. No way.
Right.
Because that's sort of different. Timeline, yes, it was a good one, but when I read it after, I was going, oh, thank God it was different, But the whole thing is I guess generally mine sci-fi and historical. What a lady who I've got to speak at their Lions Club next week, which is interesting. She said, oh, it's a thinking person's book. And I actually took that as a positive. but the she loved it. But the what is your when you said what would your genre be, you'd go, okay, it's this, but and then because if you're like me, I read all sorts of books. As long as it's well written, that's it. So what am I as a target market? Maybe I float from one genre to another. I don't know. So my own personal opinion is try and target the markets. I know publishers would say, well, what's your target market? But that's too difficult. I would say you read the book and tell me what you think, because it's not something that's just so easily just flicked off, and you're not selling shampoo or bubblegum or something. You're actually selling something that's not only taken a few years of your life, but it's also something that's not quite that easy.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help?
Oh no, that actually does, and it kind of goes back to like overall, Rob, from like again like the first interview we had into this one. What makes Travvelr Inceptio in the series so unique, in my opinion, is that there is no category for it. It's a book that transcends all categories. It has some little romance, it has some political thriller, it has some history, it has some science fiction. So it's for everyone.
It does have violence.
Yes.
It does have violence. And I'm sorry, I'm an Australian. It has profanity. That's the way Aussies talk.
I actually didn't mind it, and it's just so incredible that it's the one series, in my opinion, like out of all the books I've read from last year to now, it's the one book that really stands out because you can classify it. It does have historical fiction, but it's not solely in that category. It has science fiction elements to it, but it's not a science fiction story. It has political drama, but it's not a political thriller. And that's what makes it so unique. That's what makes it so incredible and unique. And I really enjoy reading that. And this kind of leads me to like a really powerful question, which I've now been asking my guests. And I want to hear your thoughts on this, Rob. So context for this question. So I had a guest last year on the show who was another self-published author, and she was talking about her book, Season of the Dragon. Now, I thought the Season of the Dragon was her first book, but it was her 7th book. And she actually gave me some information which I've now been reflecting on it, and it is true. And she said the biggest lie that an indie author could believe is that your debut novel is going to be the start of your legacy as a writer. Now, she said there is a 50% chance that could go in that direction, that your debut novel like soars. It's like the most incredible thing in the world. But on the off chance, it could sell a few copies and fade away. And that can deflate an author's passion and the pursuit of writing and bring that imposter syndrome back. So for you, Rob, in your opinion, like, how important is it, would you say, that yes, your debut novel may not reach the expectations that you imagine it would, but it should not deter you from writing?
Absolutely. The important thing, I always maintain that you've got this story in you, and not only is this a process of self-development and a process of reaching goals and achievements and all that sort of thing. You might have a goal to write a book sometime. Again, having that goal to write a book, if you don't have the story in you, it's useless.
Right.
But you've got to have that story in you. So, and I didn't think I did, and suddenly it came, and I had to write, and I kept writing, and so forth. But that writing passion or that incentive doesn't necessarily stop with your first book. Don't push it. Don't write another book that you're not feeling. But if you feel it and you've lit a spark, then write the next book, and then the next book, and the Travvelr books, the Travvelr universe that I wrote, while they're the first 3 books that I published, I wrote another book in between Travvelr Inceptio and Travvelr Probo, and that's the 4th book that I have called Quantum Crystal. And then I've since written another book called Drowned Paradise, and I'll just give a quick plug. Quantum Crystal is looking at the terrible PTSD that's experienced in the many wars that we seem to be eternally engaged in, and the cost that is to society. What if there was something that could? What if there was something that could help those people, and what if that could also help other humans? What potential do we have as humans? And that's that transhumanism thing. Do we need to have something added? You know, have we come to the edge of our evolution? And do we have to create our own evolution? That sort of thing. So that talks about. It starts with a young man who is king hit at a nightclub, and his future is ruined, and they decided to test something new on him. So that's Quantum Crystal. I don't want to say too much because you give things away. And the other book, which I used to live on the Gold Coast, almost by the sea, and we used to always talk about tsunamis. What would happen if we were hit by a tsunami? The Gold Coast is it's Australia's tourist mecca. It's big, and so I have, what would happen if, as a resident of the Gold Coast, and we were on a 6th level apartment building, what if there was a wave that came through just underneath that level? What would happen if at the same time all of our tech vanished, like there was some EMP or something like that? What would happen? How would you survive? And then what would happen if there is no rescue? And then what happens 50 years later? So that's a little bit of it starts as a disaster one, but it's pretty interesting because people who've read it go, oh my God, you know, now you've got me looking for tsunamis. Because where the Gold Coast is, it's very flat, like a lot of beachside places, and you know, you have a 25-meter tsunami come through, it would kill 1 million people just like that. So it's one of those, but there's a lot more to it because it goes 50 years later. So the idea, but what you always start with the premise: what would happen if? You know, what would happen if here? What would happen if there? And then the story tends to feed itself. So, in answer to your question, I don't know what my writing would do in order to affect people. Does it affect people? Would they like to read it? Does it get people thinking? If people enjoy it and their time has been spent wisely in reading my book and they enjoy it, that's as good as it can get. But if it stimulates thought and if it stimulates imagination and people going, you know what, I thought that, well, that's a good thing. And like the other author said, what if it's the 6th book? What if it's the 7th book? You know, what if it's none? If you've had 6 books written, when do you give up? When do you go, I'm not going to bother anymore? And I would suggest that's when the fire goes out, when it becomes a chore rather than a delight, when it becomes not so exciting anymore. And so whether that's 1 book or 10, that's something only the author can determine. But at the same time, you've got to start that first one, because the first one is it might be your best, it might not be, but it's still, at least you've done it and you've got that story out there.
That is beautifully said, Rob. Beautifully said. And we're now reaching the end of the interview with the last few questions, so I'm going to combine them together. So for you, Rob, looking back on the success of this amazing trilogy, who would you say have been your biggest supporters on this journey with you? And have you ever gotten a sense of validation from other authors who have read the 2nd and 3rd book in the Travvelr universe?
Look, I must always say family. I must always say the lady who's now my wife. You know, I must, because we're
Congratulations.
Yeah, we haven't been married for about 1.5 years. So, so you do that even when you're old like me. So you know, but no, she's been an amazing support, only from the point of view in understanding my frustrations in trying to contact publishers, or understanding, you know, why don't these agents want to hear, you know, like they get inundated all day. So it's part of it. But to have the motivation to continue writing, she finds that a delight. So I always have that support. My parents are both still alive. They're quite funny because they say, "Oh, I really enjoyed your book, but they do swear a bit." Okay. Because my parents are religious and they're older, you know. But they accept that. But the other, I think, are those arbitrary people who read, and they won't read your book if it's not there. If you don't get out there and write your book, you're not going to find those people who love it. And when somebody sincerely loves it, it can almost bring tears to your eyes, because it's tears of gratitude, and because they get it, and that's the thing. It's often it's if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, you've got to get out there and write it in order to do it. And hence why it's important to self-publish, because in my mind, waiting for the traditional publisher may never happen. And it's not because you're not good, it's because they have certain commercial emphases where their liability to take a risk is a lot less than it used to be. So get out there, do your book, and you never know where you'll end up.
Beautifully said. And now I've reached probably the last important question. And I don't know how to ask you this, because you kind of already answered it, and you've given like so many great pieces of advice, Rob. But ultimately, what is your word of wisdom to new indie authors out there in this industry, or people who want to transform from being writers who write as a hobby to becoming writers who are professional and writing books because this is the passion that they want to pursue?
I think the first thing to say is the old saying, don't believe everything you think. If most authors will have self-doubt. So you will go, oh, I can't do this. Oh, this is too hard. Who am I? What do I have to impart to the world? There's enough books out there, good and otherwise. Do I need to add another one? Well, I think the most important thing is just to give it a go. Mm-hmm. And then when you give it a go, as I said before, it's like swimming. As you swim, you get better. As you write, you get better. Anything you do in life, if you practice enough, you can actually get better. And so whether you take 5 years or whether you take only a few months, the writing your first book is something that if it's in you, and if you feel you must do it, then do it. And forgive yourself. Forgive yourself that you have to go back to remedial English, or forgive yourself if you feel that your work isn't that great, because everybody has to go back and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. I say read a lot, and read probably a little bit outside of your genre, because reading is kind of like the fertilizer for the soul if you're a writer.
Right.
And the other thing is, don't sit around waiting for everything to be spontaneously developed out of your mind, like, what is it, Diana out of the mind of Zeus or something. Just write, and start at chapter 1 and keep going, and then when you've got to chapter 10, go back to chapter 1 and go, oh my God, and rewrite it, and find your own way, because you can do it. And if it's in your heart and the story's there, you do it.
Awesome. Simply incredible. And I think this is a perfect way to end this incredible interview. Thank you all listeners for joining us for a late night evening. If you're in California or if you're somewhere out in the world, it will be morning or afternoon. I want to give a huge thank you to my good friend Rob Shackleford for coming back on the show for a second time. Rob, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Pleasure, sir. It's a delight.
Awesome. And Rob, where can people find and engage with you to know more about the Travvelr series, your other two books, or they just want to talk and interact with you?
I do have a website, which is, believe it or not, robshackleford.com. And I'm always able to be communicated with through the website. I am also on social media. So I would also welcome any comments or questions or anything else that you might have. And please, yes. I mean, if you have any questions, I'm always talking to authors who are having, you know, how do I do this? How do I do that? I'm always helpful because there was no one there for me when I was doing that. But at the same time, if you want a cracking good read, give one of my books a go, and I hope you enjoy.
And I will link the original interview and my original impressions video down in the description of this video, as well as tagging it as well. Make sure to go out and begin reading Travvelr Inceptio. This is an incredible book. I even link it in the impressions video a year back. You will not be disappointed. And yes, as fellow authors and fellow readers, let us all help one another and spread the word. And again, I want to give a huge thank you to my friend Rob for coming on the show again and for just being an incredible author and an amazing human being.
Thank you, sir. It's a delight.
And listeners, until next time, this has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill signing out. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below. Until then, we will see you next time. Have a wonderful evening.